Imagine standing on the edge of a battlefield, vastly outnumbered and facing an enemy so formidable that victory seems beyond reach. Yet, with just 300 men chosen by God in the most unlikely of ways, Gideon led Israel to one of the greatest triumphs in history. This isn't merely a tale of bravery. It's a powerful testament to faith, obedience, and the miracles that unfold when we place our trust in God. If you're inspired by stories like these and want to dive deeper into the incredible truths found in the Bible, don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more Bible studies, where we explore the timeless lessons and life-changing wisdom of Scripture. Together, Israel had been suffering under the harsh oppression of the Midianites for 7 long years. The Midianites were a nomadic people who, along with their allies, would invade Israel during the harvest season, destroying crops and livestock. They would sweep through the land like locusts, leaving nothing behind, plunging the Israelites into poverty and despair. The Israelites, driven to desperation, cried out to the Lord for help. In response, God sent them a prophet who reminded them of their disobedience, saying, "I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians and delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live." But you have not listened to me. Despite this rebuke, God, in His mercy, chose to deliver His people once more. He decided to use Gideon, a man from the weakest clan in the tribe of Manasseh, and someone who considered himself the least in his family. Gideon was not an obvious choice for a leader. He was a humble farmer, grappling with his fears and insecurities. Yet, God saw potential where others saw insignificance. By choosing Gideon, God was not only demonstrating His power to save, but also teaching His people that divine strength often manifests through the most unexpected of vessels. Gideon's journey began under the most humble of circumstances. As a member of the weakest clan in Manasseh and the youngest in his family, he seemed an unlikely candidate for greatness. Yet, God's plan for him unfolded most extraordinarily. While Gideon was secretly threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the oppressive Midianites, the angel of the Lord appeared to him. This divine visitation was a clear sign that God had not abandoned Israel, even in their despair. It marked the beginning of a profound intervention that would showcase God's sovereignty and unwavering commitment to His people, transforming their plight into a powerful testimony of His faithfulness. The angel addressed Gideon with a call to action. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Despite this divine commission, Gideon's uncertainty led him to seek further confirmation. He prepared an offering of meat, unleavened bread, and broth and placed it on a rock. The angel touched the offering with the tip of his staff, and fire erupted from the rock, consuming the offering entirely. In that awe-inspiring moment, Gideon realized he had indeed encountered the angel of the Lord, and he was overwhelmed with reverence and fear. This miraculous sign affirmed that God's message was true and that He was indeed with Gideon in this pivotal mission. That very night, God instructed Gideon to tear down his father's altar to the false god Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. In its place, Gideon was to build an altar to the Lord and offer a bull as a burnt offering. Although fearful of the townspeople, Gideon obeyed, doing it under the cover of darkness. When the townspeople discovered what had happened, they demanded Gideon's death. But Gideon's father, Joash, defended him, saying, "If Baal is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, meaning "let Baal contend," because he had torn down Baal's altar. As the Midianites and their allies gathered to attack Israel once more, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. He blew a trumpet, summoning the men of Israel to join him in battle. However, even then, Gideon sought further reassurance from God. He asked for a sign involving a fleece of wool. He laid the fleece on the threshing floor and asked that if God truly intended to save Israel by His hand, the fleece alone would be wet with dew, while the ground remained dry. The next morning, it was exactly as he had asked. Still seeking confirmation, Gideon asked for the opposite sign the following night, that the fleece would remain dry while the ground around it was wet with dew. God granted this request as well, finally convincing Gideon that he would indeed deliver Israel through him. With this confirmation, Gideon prepared to face the massive Midianite army. But as we already know, God had more in store, testing Gideon's faith by reducing his army to a mere 300 men, leading to the miraculous victory that followed. Gideon stood on the hill, overlooking the vast camp of his soldiers. His heart was heavy with the weight of the task ahead. The Midianites had oppressed Israel for years, and now, finally, the time had come to deliver his people. Yet, as he gazed over the sea of 32,000 men ready for battle, a whisper from God filled his heart with doubt. "Gideon," the voice of the Lord said, "you have too many men. If you go to battle with these numbers, Israel might think they save themselves by their strength. Send home all who are afraid." Gideon's brow furrowed. His army was already outnumbered by the Midianites, yet he obeyed. He called out to the men, his voice strong and clear, "Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead." A wave of movement swept through the camp as men began to step back. Gideon watched as 22,000 men turned and walked away, their heads hanging in shame and fear. Only 10,000 remained, but still, Gideon sensed that the Lord had not finished with his command. The night passed in quiet unease, and the dawn brought a new directive from God. "Gideon," the Lord said again, "there are still too many. Take the men down to the water, and I will test them for you there." With a heavy heart, Gideon led his remaining soldiers to the river. The journey was solemn, the men silent as they wondered what new trial awaited them. As they reached the water's edge, Gideon halted the group and stood apart, watching closely. "Drink," he commanded. Thirsty and weary from the grueling march, the men rushed toward the river with single-minded desperation. The cool, inviting water glistened under the sun, promising relief from the oppressive heat and exhaustion that had been their constant companion. As they reached the water's edge, the soldiers reacted in different ways, revealing the depth of their weariness and the sharpness of their discipline. Thirsty and weary from their grueling march, the men rushed toward the river, desperate for relief. The cool, inviting water glistened under the sun, promising respite from the oppressive heat and exhaustion. As they reached the water's edge, their reactions revealed the extent of their weariness and discipline. Some men, though parched and fatigued, approached the water with caution. They knelt by the river, keeping a vigilant watch as they scooped the liquid into their hands and drank. These seasoned warriors, understanding the ever-present danger of war, maintained their alertness even in this brief respite. Their controlled urgency reflected their readiness for the mission ahead. Others, overcome by their relentless thirst, showed less discipline. They collapsed onto their knees and plunged their faces directly into the river, lapping up the water with urgent greed. In their haste, they let go of their weapons, focused solely on quenching their overwhelming thirst. Gideon watched carefully, noting the differences in how the men drank. Those who drank with their hands and remained vigilant numbered 300. These were the men who, despite their exhaustion, stayed alert and ready. The rest, who had abandoned all caution, drank directly from the river. Gideon recognized that this simple act revealed a profound truth about who would be chosen for the battle ahead. In the stillness, as the last of the men lifted their heads from the water, Gideon realized that the Lord had made his choice clear. The 300 men who had remained watchful and vigilant were to be his warriors against the Midianites. The rest, despite their valor, would be sent home. Their role in the victory was now to be fulfilled by this smaller, more focused band of fighters. The Lord spoke to Gideon once more, his voice steady and unwavering. "With the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go, each to his place." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of divine command. Gideon's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing the gravity of the task before him. Only 300? Out of thousands? The odds were not just daunting. They were impossible by any human measure. But Gideon had come to understand that when God speaks, his will is not bound by human logic or numbers. Despite the fear that threatened to rise within him, he knew with absolute certainty that God's plan was beyond questioning. Taking a deep breath, Gideon steeled himself for what he had to do next. He turned to the 9,700 men who had not been chosen, their faces a mix of relief and disappointment. They were strong, capable warriors, each one ready to lay down his life for Israel. Yet, at this moment, they were being asked to step aside, to trust in a plan that defied reason. With a voice that carried both authority and compassion, Gideon addressed them. "You have fought well, and your courage has not gone unnoticed. But today, the Lord has chosen a different path. Return to your tents, for the battle will be fought by the hand of God, and he has chosen 300 to carry out his will." The men nodded, understanding that this was not a dismissal of their bravery but a call to faith. As they walked back to their tents, murmurs of disbelief and whispered prayers circulated among them. They knew they were part of something extraordinary, a story that would be remembered for generations. With the larger force gone, Gideon was left with his 300 men. These warriors, who had passed the river test, now stood before him, their faces a mix of confusion and resolve. They were seasoned and familiar with battle's chaos, yet they were now just a handful chosen by God for an extraordinary mission. Gideon met their gazes, recognizing both their doubts and their steadfastness. Despite the uncertainty and overwhelming odds, he felt a surge of faith. He knew these 300, chosen by God, were sufficient. They would face the enemy not by their numbers, but through their faith. "Men of Israel," Gideon said firmly, "the Lord has chosen you to deliver our people. Though we are few, we are not alone. Tonight, we fight not with an army's strength, but with the Almighty's power. Take heart, for victory is assured, not by our strength, but by the will of the Lord." That night, under the cover of darkness, Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 companies. He gave each man a trumpet and an empty jar with a torch inside. It was a strange way to arm an army, but they trusted Gideon and the God who guided him. When the signal came, they would surround the Midianite camp, and at Gideon's command, they would blow their trumpets, smash the jars, and raise the torches high, shouting, "For the Lord and Gideon." As the night deepened, Gideon and his men took their positions. The camp of Midian was vast, spread out in the valley below like a swarm of locusts. The time was near. Gideon took a deep breath, raised his hand, and with a mighty shout, the 300 men broke their jars, and the light of the torches blazed out into the night. The sound of the trumpets echoed through the hills, a piercing cry that filled the hearts of the Midianites with terror. They awoke in panic, seeing lights surrounding them and hearing the thunderous noise. Confusion swept through the camp as they turned on each other in the darkness, their fear magnified by the unexpected attack. Gideon watched as the Midianite army fell into disarray, their numbers no match for the chaos that had taken hold. What had started with a mere 300 men had now turned into a complete rout. The enemy fled, trampled by their own, and the victory that had seemed impossible was now at hand. Gideon and his men pursued the fleeing Midianites, driving them out of Israel's land. When the sun finally rose, the people of Israel were free from their oppressors, not by their strength, but by the will of the Lord and the faith of 300 men who drank water like dogs. And so, the name of Gideon became a symbol of God's power and faithfulness, a reminder that with him, even the smallest number can achieve the greatest victory.